name is Lisa Heywood, and I'd like to welcome you to Callers Chat, an online space that I've created for callers to come together and talk about all things calling. Today, I'm so happy to welcome Jen Cox to our stage. Jen is currently the Dance Development Manager for the English Folk Dance and Song Society, but she also is involved in so many other folk dance related things that I think I would be here all day if I were to try and list them all. I know her originally from the Morris dancing world, but today she's here to talk to us about accessibility and inclusion in folk dancing. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Jen.
Hello and welcome to Creating Inclusive Dance Spaces. Now, I a little bit think that most dance spaces should and already are inclusive by their nature as spaces to be social and interact with other humans, but I will witter about that more later. I'm going to start with a bit about me. So, as Lisa touched on, I have been Morris dancing since I was quite a teeny Morris person, although I was a slightly bigger Morris person than Lisa. I think I'm a few years older. I've been doing it since I was 12, and I'm now the chair of Open Morris, which is one of the 3 joint Morris organisations, along with the Morris Federation and the Morris Ring. There are 3 orgs that join together to purchase insurance and generally make sure that the Morris world is running smoothly. For nearly a very long time, I've been organising dance events for Wallingford Monkfest, which is a spectacular, free, mostly community festival in Wallingford in South Oxfordshire. And the picture here shows me in my typical how many hats can I wear at one time guise, with the kit of 2 Morris teams and my Bunkfest team lanyard, dancing a spot outside the Dolphin, which is one of our lovely pubs in Wallingford. So Bunkfest has been running for somewhere in the region of 24 years at this point, with the standard breaks for the pandemic, and I've been the dance coordinator for all of that time. And I wouldn't change it for the world. I also am involved with the dance events for Oxford Folk Festival, which is a very recently reborn festival that has come about off the back of what used to be Folk Weekend Oxford, similarly running dance events and Morris performances. That kind of got going as a connection on account of my involvement with Oxford Cayleys, which I'm sure some of you will have heard of. It's a very long running, nearly 40 years, Cayley series in Oxford. We run monthly events for most of the year with a summer break, as is fairly standard for a Cayley season. I'm actually the treasurer for Oxford. We run it as a small committee who have quite a lot of input into what goes on, and we're pleased to be having a very successful time at the moment. Professionally, I work partly with one young woman I support with learning disabilities at the moment, and her family run a wonderful organisation called the Music Club, which gives disabled young people access to music and dance in both monthly live sessions and Zoom sessions. So yeah, tomorrow night I shall be Macaton signing along for a disco for those young people, and a couple of weeks ago they had a ukulele band, I believe, giving them a live session where they were all bopping along. So this gives me quite a lot of formal training in disability inclusion and the background of those sorts of things, as well as a bit of a passion for it. And as Lisa said, I'm also now have been in position for about 13 months, the Dance Development Manager for EFTAS, which is literally the best job in the world, and I couldn't be happier to be doing it. So yeah, that's me. How many hats can you wear at once? I do have a bit of a reputation for being redonkulously busy, so those are some of my relevant things and qualifications. So one of the things I have been very pleased to do in my EFTAS role, which I will introduce immediately, is our guidance on inclusion and accessibility in social folk dance. This is something that I was tasked with when I came into the role, and latched onto as something that aligns very much with my passions and my sphere of experience, that's the word I'm looking for. So this is a document which is set up as a guide for anyone who wishes to consider accessibility and inclusion in their practice, be that dance organisers, callers, or dancers themselves, people attending dances. And that can be found on our website, fdus.org/policies, but it's fairly easy to find on the FDUS website. And I'd recommend that as a bit of reading for anyone who is interested in these issues, because whilst it isn't a sort of step-by-step guide to good practice, I've tried to write it as a mindset calculator kind of, and give people ideas about what to think of and how to approach situations, rather than being a sort of list of do's and don'ts. So that piece of guidance has been very well received. I took care to consult a wide proportion of the sector, callers in particular, whilst I was compiling that, and I hope I've reflected a good amount of practice. Now I'm very conscious now that I haven't actually talked about any inclusion stuff yet, so I'm going to crash on to our next slide, which is some of our pictures from the music club. Now, the right-handed picture you see there, the brightly coloured blur in a pink top hat, is me in full Morris kit, calling from the floor to a group of young people with incredibly wide set of learning disabilities, physical disabilities, and other special needs. And we're having a whale of a time. The thing that tends to happen in these situations is that you adapt as you go on the fly for these dances. So you'll call for a long ways set, and you'll have some people, for instance, who have visual impairments, who are going to be dancing holding hands with a carer or a friend, and other people who won't quite be able to get their head around the concept of dancing with a partner and will just want to dance with whoever comes at them. And particularly, as you'll see in the next slide here, will want to focus on the person who's leading the session, which is quite a common thing as well. So a young man dancing with me on the left there is someone who has a history of what most people might call challenging behaviour, although that language is being changed now, and his engagement with this particular session was absolutely glorious. He latched onto me in my silly hat and spent the whole day wanting to dance with me, which was really lovely. And I was able, because I was calling from the floor in that situation, able to respond to his needs and the way he wanted to dance, which was really satisfying and very, very rewarding. On the right here, you see the same club at another session where there was a maypole dance, and you can see one of my lovely young friends is sat on a chair under the maypole. This is another part of another aspect of that kind of adaptive inclusion that happens in special needs settings, where this lad isn't someone who's going to be able to walk around, to physically walk around a maypole, nor hold a string. Those aren't things that he would normally do, but he was so delighted to be involved and to be able to be part of that through that adaptation of just being able to sit under the maypole and have the world revolve around him. I think I spent some of that session also following the young people as we got them doing a very, very simple take it in turns to weave in and out. I am a whistle player, so I was able to be very portable and follow some of those kids around playing their favourite tune, or get them to chase me to get them to engage, which is another good example of adapting. That session, we also had a step clog team, my step clog team, doing a display performance as like a spot in that ceilidh, and some of the young people were able to access the sensory input of the clogs by sitting on the wooden floor and feeling it through the bums, which is always great fun when they're trying to get you to bounce as loudly as you can and you're like, my knees hurt, stop. So yeah, that's that level of inclusion for a very, very diverse, both in age and need, population is something that that I think on the fly is the best way I can describe it. But it's a really good illustration of just how those different needs can affect how someone will interface with a dance. And I do think that there are microcosms of those in mainstream Kayleys as well. So I'm going to move on to my main bugbear, no. Hill I'm going to die on, no. But something I do like to make sure people consider when they're working with dance for me is how that language you're using as a dance teacher or caller affects the people that you're working with. Is in that special needs Kaylee setting, the absolute last thing that I'm going to consider using in my calling language is gendered language. It's just a barrier to those people understanding what's going on. You can guarantee that those sets won't be gendered or won't understand the concept of gender, and it's the first thing that of that more traditional aspect of calling that gets taken out of that setting. So I always think that calling to any standard Kaylee series or wedding audience, you're going to encounter groups of people dancing who are not dancing in what you might think of as traditional gendered roles, and you will always be misgendering someone in those circumstances if you're calling with gendered language. And as a queer person who's grown up in the folk scene, I consider that I've spent a lot of my life being misgendered, and I've really had enough of it. So to me, that's not something that it's okay to do. I'm fully aware that there are settings where people who have known that kind of language and those kinds of settings for all their lives and experiencing cognitive decline, or are just not able to sort of switch their thinking around it, might find it more accessible to dance to gendered language. And I'm not saying that that's inappropriate, but as a starting point, I strongly believe that non-gendered language is the most accessible and best practice for inclusion and accessibility. So when you're thinking of how you can make your language as inclusive as possible, there are a few little tricks I like to use. One of which is that ungendered language, and another of which is being very, very silly, which I always think is a leveler. And I think an accessibility point that doesn't often get thought of in social dance settings is people's embarrassment about participating, about potentially getting things wrong. I have a family member who is a professional dancer, professional musical theatre dancer, and absolutely won't get up at an ordinary Kaylee with performance anxiety. So that kind of levelling of humour or demonstrating things for yourself, I think is a very valuable inclusion tool as well. I'm going to pop through to my next slide. So thinking about what might make a dance less accessible, I'm going to run through a few things that are maybe obvious to someone who works in an SEN sector, but aren't necessarily the first thing that everyone might think of. So environmental factors such as lighting. We very frequently at Oxfolk get requests from people who want to know what the stage setup, what the lighting is going to be like, what the room is going to feel like, because those bright light, flashing light environments can be intimidating, difficult, sensorily inappropriate for people with neurodivergence, or even just someone who's got a visual impairment. I have a friend who's very, very bad with flashing lights after some eye surgery, and that would be less accessible to her. Poor physical access is obviously a thing that happens. a lot of ceilidh and dance venues, there isn't a lot you can do about it. If there's 2 village halls, maybe hire the one that's got a ramp. But that's a thing. And lack of space is, I think, is something that it's worth considering, because I know a lot of people feel, and I myself, as a person who is technically able-bodied but often injured and kind of messed up, I find dancing in a very tight environment extremely uncomfortable. There's absolutely nothing worse when you have an injured Achilles than having the back of your heel trodden on, walking backwards into another line. So thinking about that room set up and space around sets, even when you're setting a dance up, can be a valuable inclusion tool. Language barriers we've touched on. Overly complex language and jargon. It's a thing that happens quite commonly in Balfolk and contra settings these days, rather than ceilidh and English social folk dances. There will be a little kind of beginner's bit or a workshop section at the beginning of a dance, and that's something that I think the ceilidh sector can learn from, because those learn as you go along plans that I know a lot of callers make don't need to be a kind of social engineering thing. To me, I think that there's an argument for a little bit of jargon busting at the beginning of any dance, particularly in a setting like a wedding where maybe people aren't already folk dancers. Lack of facilities, that's a pretty obvious one. If you haven't got a disabled loo at your venue, then that's less accessible to somebody who might need that facility. And similarly, the lack of information about those facilities. If a disabled person has to contact you to ask if they can access your venue, then they're paying the disability tax, where they've got to work harder to access your event than somebody else does. So it's absolutely crucial to make sure that those sorts of bits of information are available. And that's something that's a little bit more for organisers, but it's something that you can think about when you take a booking as a caller as well, to ask what those information points are like, and encourage organisers to do it. I'm conscious I've put those 2 things in the wrong order, but the last point we haven't touched on, information about dances. Again, as a frequently injured person, I won't get up and dance a dance if I don't know roughly what to expect. And that comes into the style of stepping and the style of music. Sometimes I know a lot of settings in folk dance clubs, you'll get someone playing a tune through, which is something I really like. So you can give a dancer the idea of what it's going to feel like to dance to a tune. So what have I forgotten about that I was going to mention here? Oh yeah, just talking about our environmental factors for neurodivergent people. Something we always used to do at Folk Weekend Oxford, and we've carried on into Oxford Folk Festival, is popping a little tent quiet zone in the corner of a hall for anyone who wants to just kind of snuggle away from the world for 5 minutes. And they are surprisingly popular with a lot of adults, which is a very lovely thing, just like a little kids pop-up tent. And they're fun as well, and just help people to enjoy an event. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Information is indeed key. So when you're setting a dance up, please do give as much information about it as you possibly can. It does help those people who have injuries or who might be managing certain physical aspects to know what they're going to be able to cope with or be able to avoid. And you can always teach adaptations to a figure as well. I'm sure we all know there's more than one way to do a basket. You can have the cross-hand version of the hold hands version, or even turn it into a star if that's going to be easier for people. So giving people that freedom to play with bits of choreography is a valuable thing too. Sometimes a dance involving chaining partner will be less accessible to some people. Someone who is maybe injured and is feeling confident about dancing with the person they came with, but would wish to avoid dancing with people with different physical characteristics. I know sometimes I prefer to avoid dancing with really tall people, because I'm a tiny little short person, and that can be uncomfortable for me with shoulders, etc. If I'm reaching up high or getting bounced off my feet. So yeah, that's another key piece of information that I think is an accessibility point when you're calling a dance, is to give that information about partner changing. But it's really about creating an environment where people feel comfortable to say, oh no, I can't do that, can we do it in a different way, and make sure that that is that the comfort of that is available and understood by your dancers, because the last thing you want to do is have somebody at your dance who has an accessibility need, be it the simplest need of sort of not straining their right shoulder or something like that, who doesn't feel that they can interface with the dance safely, or who doesn't feel that they can ask for help or step away. So it's important to create that environment and to think of your dance with that accessibility mindset, is how I like to think of it. And reading the room as to what those people are doing, and maybe spotting if people aren't getting up for certain types of dances. I know that's something I always do when I'm calling for the kids with special needs, is try and note what hooks get people engaged and reuse those when I'm making stuff up on the fly. So yeah, reading your room with that accessibility mindset, definitely something that is easy to do in a room full of 30 special needs kids who you know quite well, and probably really difficult to do when you've got a hall full of 200 people, some of whom you can't see particularly well. But it's always worth considering. So I'm going to pop on to then my last slide and see if I've got anything in my notes that I've forgotten to say. I don't think I have. So all of this that I'm talking about, I think, translates into doing the work and making sure that you've thought about the accessibility points, so that somebody with those needs, who either can't advocate for themselves or who shouldn't have to do more work to attend your event or access your event, when they have something other than able-bodied cis white male, shouldn't have to do more work to access your event. So if you've done that thinking, then they don't have to. And I think that's one of the key points about being a good entertainer and actually a good human, if I'm going to get really soapboxy about it. But I hope I haven't been too soapboxy. And I'm always very, very happy to help anyone who's interested in talking about this fascinating and very rewarding sphere of thinking. So there's my email address, and please do feel free to ever contact me if you want any advice about anything accessibility wise. So that brings me to the end. Thank you very much.